Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are listing our top 5 episodes from the series overall.
And I think the idea here is that these are the 5 episodes we feel people should watch in case they don't have time for all 11 seasons and 255 episodes.
These are the essential Happy Days. These are the ones that you should watch to get a general idea of what the show is about.
Do you recommend that people watch all 11 seasons and 255 episodes?
That's a very good question. I feel like if I say no, then I make this entire project seem like a bad idea, and I'm not sorry that we did it, but on the other hand, it might not be for everyone.
So if people only have time for 5 episodes, we have some recommendations.
Number 5.
So in thinking about what episode I would recommend for someone who's entirely new to the show, that kind of serves as my guiding principle in deciding what episodes I would choose. And so I'm going to begin with Season 3's Richie Fights Back.
Hey, it's me and Bing Bong alone.
The name is Richie. Don't ever call me anything else.
It gives you a pretty good idea of who these characters are, and it focuses on one of the recurring motifs of Happy Days during Richie's tenure, which is that it's about him trying to figure out who he is when everyone seems to already have him figured out as a dweeb. And it also culminates in some very funny physical comedy. It's got a great showcase for Pat Morita as Arnold, and Joni flips a guy over her shoulder. It's great.
I will admit that Richie Fights Back was not even on my radar when I was compiling my list, but it is a great episode. For my number 5 episode, I chose what maybe many people's number 1 is probably the most viewed and most rerun episode of the show. It tends to air at least once every December, and it's called Guess Who's Coming to Christmas?
Hey, Mr. C, thanks a lot.
For what?
I know you're hip to Waukesha.
Well, to tell you the truth, Fonzie, it was Richie who figured it out.
This was definitely a turning point for the show. It shows Fonzie becoming a part of the Cunningham family, and it shows the direction that Happy Days was going to go for the last 9 of its seasons. It's a really touching family story, and it's very well made and well directed, too. Did Guess Who's Coming to Christmas stay in your memory as well, Peter?
Guess Who's Coming to Christmas is also going to be on my list. I am glad that our reasons are similar but do not completely overlap, so that when we get to it, I'm not just repeating what you said.
Number 4.
My number 4 episode is my personal pick for funniest episode of Happy Days. It makes great use of physical comedy. It makes great use of characters making terrible decisions and slowly being driven mad. And it's also one that has stayed within the cultural memory thanks to one of its most crowd-pleasing moments being included in a Weezer video. It is They Shoot Fonzie's Don't They, which you might know is the one where Fonzie and Joni join a dance marathon in order to show up a rival of Joni's.
I want to be Jill Higgins.
Jill Higgins, you mean that little pom-pom turnip? She's still bugging you?
Yeah, more than ever.
Yeah, and you're Joni's only chance of beating her.
I tell you, the Fonzie's work is never done.
It is a little bit strange that they got the title from this incredibly dark, sad, horrifying book and movie, but purely taken on its own, it is my personal pick for funniest episode of Happy Days. And it's also an episode about Fonzie doing something that he normally would not do in order to help a member of his adopted family.
They Shoot Fonzie's Don't They will also turn up on my list. I rewatched it just last night in preparation for this show, and it still had an effect on me. My number 4 is from very late in the series, and it's an episode called A Little Case of Revenge. It's from the 10th season of Happy Days, but it features my favorite guest appearance of all time on Happy Days by a young man named Mr. Tom Hanks as Dr. Dwayne Twitchell.
You forget where the park was last night?
I was busy.
Busy, schmizzy. All right, right here, right now.
That is an excellent choice for all-time favorite guest star. I might have to concur with that, depending on how you qualify Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams.
Number 3.
Number 3 is an episode from all the way back in season 1, and in choosing it, I was thinking about Happy Days is a show about a white nuclear family. It is a show about nostalgia for a 1950s that never really existed, even for the very privileged few who came close to it. But at the same time, something that I appreciate about Happy Days is that even if the Cunningham family are that, they're also people who make an effort to be accepting and understanding of of other people. And an episode that I think does an excellent job of demonstrating that, even before Fonzie became an honorary Cunningham, is season 1's Great Expectations.
Mom, Dad, this is Deidre.
Like, hi.
How do you do?
Won't you sit down and join us?
Thank you.
Not to be confused with season 8's much less good Great Expectations. In this episode, we are introduced to Deirdre, a beatnik poet who Richie befriends because he admires her freedom, and on some level, he wants to be like her. He feels stifled by his family, even if they are loving. He feels stifled by the expectations placed on him, and he wants to take Deirdre up on her offer to go with her in her group. At the same time, Deirdre herself is pregnant, and she ultimately makes a decision that she feels is best for her and her partner and her unborn child. It's an episode I like a lot because while the Cunninghams' reactions to Deirdre range from befuddled to nervous to excited, but they are all ultimately supportive of her, and it's an episode that I like a lot, even though it's hardly the funniest episode Happy Days ever did.
Great Expectations is one of my favorites. It was one of my runners-up for this list, mainly just because other bigger episodes came along and kind of crowded it out of my memory. One thing that I loved about Great Expectations was its exploration of the beatnik world. We even get Ralph and Potsy dressing up as beatniks, and we get Marcia Sims as a beatnik coffee house waitress, and we even get the voice of Brainy Smurf as a beatnik poet who is the father of the child.
Are you Lawrence?
I was when I came in here, but who knows who I'll be when I get home.
So that's all wonderful stuff. My number 3 episode is actually from the last season of the show, the one when the show was plummeting in the ratings and was about to be canceled. And yet I think they did one of their most necessary episodes, and it's called The Spirit is Willing.
If it was up to me, it would be 1955 forever. What's wrong with the present? The present is too fraught with decision-making. Fraught?
And we just talked about it last week, and we said a lot about how it undermines the entire premise of the show, which is, hey, weren't the 50s great? And wouldn't it be great to live in the past again? And this is the episode that says maybe living in the past is not a great idea, and it's a death trap, and Fonzie could literally die from doing this. So maybe it's best to just let time move forward.
Number 2.
Joe, that is a great segue into my number 2, which is also The Spirit is Willing.
What a coincidence.
Everything you said is absolutely true. Here is an episode about how nostalgia is a form of the death drive in a story that would not be entirely out of place on The Twilight Zone. It's an episode that could really only happen as Happy Days was coming to a close. It's pretty much a repudiation of the show's entire concept, and it is great.
My number 2 episode of all of Happy Days is the aforementioned They Shoot Fonzies, Don't They? When I am thinking of great scenes in the Happy Days canon, I think there are few better ones than when Fonzie is being taken out of Arnold's on a stretcher and then stops and then challenges Charlene Tilton.
I have a challenge dance request.
No.
Hey, yowza, yowza. No yowza, just a challenge.
This challenge dance is called
The Kazatsky.
And of course, it is famous from the Weezer video, but it's a great scene on its own. And another thing that was great about this episode is that it shows Howard and Marion's parenting strategy in raising Richie and Joni. Rather than telling them what to do, they present opportunities to the kids to exercise good judgment on their own. Howard isn't going to tell Joni to drop out of the dance marathon for Fonzie's sake. He's going to leave that up to her.
I'm leaving it all up to you.
She's the one who has to make the final call. We will get something similar to that in Smokin' Ain't Cool a few seasons later, where he's not going to force her to stop smoking. He gives her the responsibility of saying yes or no to smoking. I thought that is very interesting. And it's just a bravura performance by Henry Winkler, who has to be exhausted and broken for the entire show, and then has to put on this incredible display of dancing. And Henry Winkler turns out to be an awesome dancer. Really,
yeah.
We don't really get that much dancing from Henry over 11 seasons.
I am going to echo what you said about Howard and Marion's parenting strategies. That's also something that I appreciate about the show. The family structure of the Cunninghams is not wholly patriarchal because Howard and Marion are doing their best to cultivate autonomy in Richie and Joni. They are aware that sooner or later Richie and Joni are going to have to leave the nest, and they need to be prepared to do things on their own. They can't just be copies of their parents. You already did mention my number one, and that is Guess Who's Coming to Christmas.
Oh, there's a big surprise. That's an incredible. I think I'm going to have a heart attack and die from that surprise.
It feels very obvious to choose this one because Christmas episodes frequently have a life of their own separate from the shows that they come from, because you have a reason to rewatch them every year. But I do think that Guess Who's Coming to Christmas is one of the purest distillations about what I like about this show, and that's the fact that the Cunninghams are willing to take in people who are not part of their immediate family group and make them part of their family, unless you're Potsy. That is exactly what happens to Fonzie. Richie is the first one to recognize that Fonzie is going to be alone at a time when human connection is emphasized more than any other. Howard is initially hesitant, but he also soon realizes he should not be alone at this time of year. And Marion gets a really great moment where she just tells Fonzie, "You're staying for Christmas, dinner," end of discussion. And you also get development of Fonzie and Joni's relationship, where she manages to basically get one over on him by tricking him into looking into her viewfinder.
Oh, and here's the Polynesian girls bathing in a pond.
Let me see that. They're just more palm trees.
That's one for the kid.
And you can see him starting to develop this respect and protectiveness of her that is going to last throughout the entire series.
It is a beautiful episode. If it was not my number one episode, it's because I watch Happy Days for fun and laughs. And while there are fun moments and laughs in Guess Who's Coming to Christmas, it's not the one that made me laugh the hardest and gave me the most fun. And as I was looking through my favorite episodes, there was one episode that made me laugh harder than any other one. And it is from season 3. And it's called A Date with Fonzie. It is the episode that introduces the characters of Laverne and Shirley.
Hey, Fonzie!
Hey, DeFazio, they're here. Laverne, this is Laverne DeFazio, she's mine. And this is Shirley Feeney, she's yours, as you can see.
When I was thinking about great scenes in Happy Days history, one of the funniest scenes, and maybe my favorite scene in all 11 years, comes when Richie and Shirley are alone together in the Cunningham house. And Richie is very, very uncomfortable because Shirley is older and more sexually experienced, and Richie doesn't know how to handle this. Then he walks out of the room for a moment, and Shirley starts telling a story about how she got into a fight with Laverne. And when Richie comes back into the room, Shirley accidentally punches Richie right in the face.
That is an all-time great Happy Days scene.
And then Howard and Marion and Joni walk in and get the wrong idea about what is happening. And it's farce. That's why A Date with Fonzie is my number one episode.
Oh, that is an excellent choice.
One thing that we've said in the past about this episode is that it was a backdoor pilot, which actually it wasn't. It was not meant to launch another series. It just happened to launch another series.
That's probably why it's much better than Happy Days' actual backdoor pilots, like Fonzie Meets Cat.
So, Peter, now that we have arrived at the end of all 11 seasons of Happy Days, has your estimation of Happy Days generally gone up or down while doing this podcast?
My estimation of Happy Days has zigzagged quite a bit, I think. But in the end, I think my estimation of it has gone slightly up. The later seasons of Happy Days are better than I remembered them being, and going over my top episodes from each season, I found that they were all generally consistently pretty good. Although with the later seasons, I think it's a case of high highs and very low lows and quite a bit of mediocrity.
The terrifying lows, the dizzying highs, the creamy middles.
But I think that what I've learned from Happy Days is that just because something is artificial and fake and kind of inherently conservative, because nostalgia is inherently conservative, there can still be genuine entertainment and genuine feeling in there.
My experience was very much the same as yours. My estimation of Happy Days waxed and waned over the course of these 11 seasons, but generally I grew affectionate and protective about the show. Do people in your life know that you do a Happy Days podcast?
They do, yes.
Do you find that people's interest in the show depends on their interest in Happy Days, the original series?
To an extent, yes, I do. I think that you do need to have some awareness of the fact that Happy Days is, one, surprisingly influential in many ways, and two, lasted way longer than most people expect. For a lot of people, the jumping the shark is the main thing that they associate with Happy Days, even though it's not really indicative of Happy Days. In some ways, it is indicative of the show, like the fact that Fonzie as a character got got more and more powerful in a lot of ways. But in other ways, it's not really indicative of the show because that was a season opener. They were doing something big to get more people to watch. I think if you expect every episode after the Jumping the Shark to be like it, you will be disappointed/relieved, depending on what you wanted.
I very much feel that the Jumping the Shark moment has been blown way out of proportion. They had done some silly episodes before that. They would do some silly episodes after that, but they always mixed it with more down-to-earth or realistic stories. I don't think that Hollywood Part 3 in any way constitutes a meaningful dividing point in Happy Days history.
The idea that you can pinpoint the exact moment that a show gets bad is not very true, I think. Generally speaking, I think that a show getting bad often has more to do with big cast shakeups or big writers' room shakeups. More of what people associate the show getting less good with is when you had things like Ron Howard and Donnie Most leaving, or Happy Days getting pummeled by the A-Team in the ratings.
When you do a live action sitcom, first of all, your actors are physically getting older on camera. If you're doing a show that's really centered around teenagers and high school, you have a ticking time bomb basically on your hands because they're not going to be able to be plausible as that for long. And plus, the writers just run out of things for them to do after so many years.
That's why you had them introducing characters like Casey to be the new Joni, and Flip to be the new Chachi, and Roger to be the new Richie. Although in Roger's case, I think he came out of it the best. I think that is one of the biggest things I learned from this whole thing, is that Ted McGinley is a terrific actor, and he is more than just replacement Richie.
I think it's significant that of the characters added to the show after Ron and Don left, Ted McGinley was the only one to last from season 8 through season 11.
Honorable mention to Jenny Piccolo, who sat out most of season 11.
Jenny Piccolo is one of the delights of the later seasons of Happy Days. I only wish that she had been introduced much, much earlier in the story, back when Joni was still in high school, so that she and Joni could have had adventures together. In those years, we hear about Jenny as an off-screen character, but we don't get to see her until it's kind of too late in the show. So we've kind of already talked about this. What would you say to people who say that the show should have stopped after season 7?
Then we never would have gotten Tom Hanks and Fonzie's Kung Fu Showdown. And we also never would have gotten the one where Fonzie meets a ghost, possibly in his dreams, but possibly not. The thing about a show that goes on for way too long is that, yeah, it goes on for way too long, but you also get unexpected gems like those because the show has been going on for so long that they can get weird with it. They can get a little strange, a little bizarre.
My final question to you, Peter, is this. What can people still get out of watching Happy Days today, if anything?
From watching Happy Days, you can get characters who are recognizably sitcom archetypes, but who are also enlivened by genuinely good performances and jokes that are, if not consistently knee slappers, then are consistently chuckle inducing. I think the underrated MVPs of the show as a whole are Tom Bosley and Marion Ross, who are simultaneously very engaging and lovable characters and also genuinely very funny. And something that I really like about their dynamic is that either of them can be the straight man at any given point. Like Howard can be more down to earth than Marion at times, and Marion can be the sensible one when Howard is being an exceptionally large cheapskate.
That is one thing I have definitely learned over the course of watching 11 seasons. They were very blessed to have Tom Bosley and Marion Ross in these roles. They are the heart and soul of Happy Days. They help anchor it. They just do consistently good work week in and week out.
Happy Days can be kind of interesting as a bit of a sociological document, not necessarily of the 50s themselves, because it obviously does not actually accurately reflect what the 50s were like, but of how the 1970s viewed the 1950s. They never go full, the 1950s were completely idyllic. They do acknowledge things like racism and the fear that the Cold War will turn hot and your neighborhood will get nuked. But there is still the underlying subtext of the 1950s sure were neat, unlike now. As the show goes on, you can tell that the writers are slowly losing interest in that. It is pretty infamous that in the later seasons are basically just the 80s with a rapidly peeling coat of 1960s paint.
To wrap this conversation up, I'll ask, where do you think Happy Days stands in the pantheon of American television comedy? Is it top tier? Is it middle tier? Is it lower tier?
I would say Happy Days is pretty middle tier. There's plenty of killer stuff, but there's also a lot of filler. I think it might have been somewhat better regarded if it had ended earlier, but also some of the stuff I really like is there in the later seasons. I think Happy Days is in this weird place where it is very mainstream, but also simultaneously very niche. I don't think a lot of people would call Happy Days their favorite television show ever. It was in this weird place where it was simultaneously must-see TV, but also it was the kind of show that you watched it because it was on.
That was my family's experience with Happy Days. We watched it because there were 3 channels, and we chose Happy Days because it was the most popular show in America for a while. Over the course of doing these podcasts, I have become a little bit protective of Happy Days. I am very guarded when I mention the show because people will immediately come back with Jump the Shark or Joni Loves Chachi or something. I'll be like, yeah, Joni loves Chachi, and yeah, he jumped a shark, but there's a lot of good stuff in this show that you're missing, even in the later seasons.
There is a lot to enjoy, and also a lot to be baffled by, and also a lot to grimace uncomfortably at.
And hopefully, Peter, we did all 3 of those. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow both of us on bluesky.social, and Blue Sky just opened up to the public. You no longer need an invite to get on Blue Sky, so sign up, follow both of us. I'm petervolfranc.bsky.social. That's PeterVulfranc.
And I'm joeblevins.bsky.social. People can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com. They can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket next time we speak?
One of the many Happy Days spin-offs was an animated show that is infamous because it is one of the strangest possible spin-offs they could have gone with. It's the one where Fonzie, Richie, and Ralph time travel with a girl from the future and a dog that walks on its hind legs. It is the Fonz and the Happy Days gang, and we are going to start talking about it next week with King for a Day and May the Farce Be With You.
I cannot tell you how excited I am to talk about this very stupid show. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Happy days are here again. The skies above are clear again. Let us sing a song of cheer again. Happy days are here again. All together shout it now. There's no one who can doubt it now. So let's tell the world about it now. Happy days are here again.
One mistake that we made early on has been bothering me for a while. In the episode Because She's There, we express confusion at Richie's Romeo costume having a sword, even though in Romeo and Juliet, it is extremely important to the plot that Romeo does in fact kill Tybalt.
Away to heaven, respected lenity, and fire-eyed fury be my conduct now. Now, Tybalt!
Romeo and Juliet is one of those plays that everyone in the Anglophone world knows, and we are very, very sorry.
May I humbly add, Your Honor, that we've learned our lesson and that we'll never do it again.